if last year's, right, if 2023 Washington Kalen Deboer's team had played this past year's 2024 Notre Dame team, who would have won? I actually feel pretty confident that Notre Dame would have won that game.
Really? Because I feel the opposite.
Really? So
if you gave Marcus Freeman and Kalen Deboer 5 years to rebuild Miami, who would be more accomplished head coach?
I would go with Deboer.
Really?
I would. Freeman is viewed as, well, I mean, he was the young up and coming, coordinator, got the hire, got the promotion to be the head coach, and he's done a phenomenal job with Notre Dame. Look, they just had a natty appearance, right?
Right.
But when you look at the track record of Kalen Deboer, primarily the job he did at Sioux Falls, which I believe is a D2 or D3 school in South Dakota, as well as what he did with Washington, the way that he's been able to turn around programs and get them to national championships. He won national championships at Sioux Falls, and he got Washington to a natty after they were a good but not great program for a while, made the playoffs under Chris Peterson. Then the whole Jimmy Lake thing happened. He comes in, and after the program was seemingly in disarray, right, he brings them back, navigates the transfer portal brilliantly. Now he's at Alabama, and sure, it wasn't, they missed the playoffs, right? By all means, for Alabama, that's a disappointment.
Yep.
But you also have to remember, he did not have Ryan Grubb, his offensive coordinator, who has gone with him everywhere until DeBoer took the Alabama job. Grubb stayed in Seattle to coach with the Seahawks and is now going to Tuscaloosa. That is a big part of why I think that Alabama is going to take the next step this next season. But I think just based off of, look, they're both great coaches. The lights are brighter at Miami than they are at Washington or certainly Sioux Falls, right? Let's not get it twisted. But I think that the proof is in the pudding, and DeBoer has proven up to this point that he can bring programs back to national relevancy. And again, I love Coach Freeman, right? This is no slight to him. But to say that the program that he inherited was already in really good hands, like that statement is absolutely true, right? Like it's weird because I feel like I'm kind of discrediting what he did. But that's not what I'm trying to do, because what he's done is very impressive. Because look at what Brian Kelly did in Notre Dame.
Yeah,
he hasn't he fielded some national championship caliber teams, right, that played for natties. I think it's safe to say that the vibe around the program, that national outlook, is that Marcus Freeman is still on the rise with this Notre Dame program. So I don't blame people for taking Freeman, but for me, if I'm looking at Miami, the state they're in, and where historically where they should be, I would go with DeBoer.
Oh man, this one is tough. And that's the reason why I put the poll up, is like, do you go off the history of a guy that's been a Matt Rule program builder, but even on steroids, basically, right?
Yep, literally.
or do you go with Marcus Freeman, who had a 9-win season to a 10-win season to a 14-win season and making a national championship, right? And you can't really discredit that, because at the end of the day, when it comes to important wins, not only being 2-1 in bowl games, well, I guess if you want to count the national championship, 2-2 in bowl games, they've accomplished just as, when you talk about the highest ranking win or the highest ranking accomplishment is meeting a national championship, and they did it in a very short amount of time at their respective schools. When we talk about the FBS level schools, right, it didn't take Kalen Deboer very long, and you can arguably say that, I don't know, this will be a good question. If Notre Dame's team from this year and 2 years ago, the Washington team, were to go against each other, who would be the national champion? What they lost at Notre Dame, for him to accomplish what he did when nobody knew how good actually Riley Leonard was going to be, having new guys step up to the plate like Jeremiah Love, and Riley Leonard comes into his own with a very anemic wide receiving core all year long. I just wonder, if you flip-flop their situations from last year, who would have been more successful? Or if you put Marcus Freeman on Washington with Michael Penix Jr. and all the talent that they had with those three great receivers, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, and Rome Odunze, and then Dylan Johnson as their running back, like how good they could have been as well with Marcus Freeman. I think it's like, I don't think you can choose a bad answer. And I think what's to Kalen Deboer's credit, coming to Alabama after the regime and the dominance of Nick Saban and still squeaking out what? They had 9 wins last year. That's still, people don't understand how impressive that is to not listen to all the noise and being able to do your own thing. And now you get more comfortable. I just look at both of their situations like, my goodness, like to give an excuse of every team comes down to the coach ultimately, but they don't play in the game. Think about all the great teams that were just one coach away from meeting their potential. And I think if Kalen Deboer and Marcus Freeman were to come into the market and continue the success that they've been having, the sky's the limit for both of them. He literally has put Brian Kelly to shame in just his 3 years at Notre Dame. Even with the loss, like realistically, when you look at Ohio State's team, they were not only the highest NIL paid team out there, but those guys step up to the plate. Like anybody would have, on their worst day, would have gotten crushed by Ohio State. But then you look at like they go against Michigan, they lose that game, and then they lose against one score to Oregon at Autzen Stadium. It's like, man, those if anything, those are the 2 toughest losses that any team would have gone through, because Oregon ultimately ended up undefeated for the season and had a great year up until when they got to where they got to. On the other side of that, you look at the Michigan game, that is the toughest rivalry in college football, regardless of who's there. Sherrone Moore was going to coach his ass off in that game regardless, and he's been their kryptonite for what, 4 seasons now? I don't know, man. Like, you start pulling back the layers of this and it's just the biggest onion ever. And I don't think that there's a wrong answer. What coach do you want more? I mean, I think demeanor wise, they're both kind of the same, laid back, but can get fiery at moments. You know what I'm saying? But ultimate lover of their players. You know what I'm saying? The arm around your neck coach after you throw 3 interceptions and still believes in you and is not going to pull you in the 4th quarter, and then able to get that little bit out of you to make you throw that touchdown to win the game. Like, and without the greatest defenses ever. You know, like, I mean, Notre Dame's probably had a better defense over the last 2 seasons. Of course, I mean, Xavier Watts and, you know, JD Bertrand and Jack Kaiser and all those guys. The talent that Kalen Deboer had with 𝗎𝙬𝘗𝗀𝗀 Campbell and Malachi Moore, like, I don't know, bro. Like, you see what I'm saying? You start pulling back the layers and you're like, oh, Marcus might have it over him. And it's like, nah, Kalen's talent on defense was almost as comparable as his. Could they have just played each other last year? Can we? I just want to see that. I just want to see that game.
That would have been such a good game too. I mean, I think it would have been a different ball game though, you know, depending on when they played, because Alabama, they started off the season hot and then they kind of hit some rough patches down the stretch, you know. I think that would be a complete, and meanwhile, Notre Dame, they were kind of rocky to begin the season and then turned it up as the season went on. So I think depending on when that game was played, we may have seen a different outcome. You know, you brought up an interesting hypothetical that got me thinking, right? You know, if last year's, right, if 2023 Washington Kalen Deboer's team had played this past year's 2024 Notre Dame team, who would have won? I actually feel pretty confident that Notre Dame would have won that game.
Really? Because I feel the opposite.
Really? So the way I see it, right, is Texas almost beat Washington, right, in that semifinal game. But it wasn't because of Quinn Ewers in the passing game. It was because of the running game. That's what kept them in it. When you look at how efficient they were and how the Texas offensive line was just moving Washington's defense, if Sarkisian had kept on running the ball, Texas would have won, in my opinion. I think that game, that loss for Texas, didn't come down to a missed jump ball by A.D. Mitchell. It came down to Sarkisian not play calling very well. And we saw Washington get, you know, run out of the house by Michigan, going into the game with a ground and pound approach. When I watched, right, Notre Dame throughout the season, we know that their strength, like you said, with the lack of strength of the receiving room, their running game was their bread and butter. Not just Jeremiah Love, who in epic fashion ripped off a 98-something yard touchdown run for the first touchdown in the 16-team playoff or 12-team playoff, but we also have Riley Leonard, who I think had like 10 carries in the first quarter against Ohio State.
And a touchdown.
Absurd. Like
he was their first touchdown, remember?
Yeah, like I think that Notre Dame would have just pounded them to death. I do think that I don't think it would have been a beatdown like what we saw Michigan do to Washington, because that Washington team, they have a lot of firepower offensively in terms of their passing game with Penix at the helm. I don't think that this past year's Notre Dame defense was at the same level as Michigan's in 2023. So I think it would have been a really good game. I think that Notre Dame would have won because they could control the clock. But I would love to have seen that game. 2023 Washington and 2024 Notre Dame, Deboer and Freeman. Holy cow, man! That's offensively offensive fireworks with an offensive-minded head coach versus a defensive stone wall with a former defensive coordinator.
You start thinking about Washington's defense, and it's like there were no slouches either. And then it's like, oh man, who was on that defense? And you're like, well, 𝗕𝘂𝘂𝘀𝘂𝘀𝘀 was there when he was on 1,000, when everybody thought that he was going to be a top 5 corner probably in this draft, and didn't have that good of a year. But like 𝗕𝘂𝘂𝘂𝘂𝘀 was shutting down Oregon. They couldn't do anything to his side of the field. And then the guy that ended up getting hurt, that like people started to figure out that like this dude is a better edge rusher than what people actually give him credit for. Braylon Trice was on that defense too. What we're trying to say, guys, is like we're big fans of both of those guys. Like there's no bigger fans of Marcus Freeman than probably us out there outside of Notre Dame fans, and it makes us want to root for Notre Dame, even though we've been saying forever, and I think a lot of people in America agree that like they should join a conference. Brian Kelly on Notre Dame made you hate them, versus Marcus Freeman on Notre Dame makes you like be okay with their.
He's so likable.
Yeah, he's so likable. I could talk about that all day, man. I'm glad that we got into the weeds of this, because it makes me feel good about the question that I posed. Like the people that voted, I would love to know if you just took a step back for 5 minutes and really thought about like if Mario Cristobal was not there for 5 years and you lined up the timelines exactly at the same time and you gave them Carson Beck and that offensive line and Mark Fletcher and all those guys on defense, who would have more success in 5 years?